Hollywood's golden era created child stars who shone brightly on screen while their real lives were being systematically destroyed behind the scenes. And case number 7 will absolutely haunt you. Oh, these weren't just young actors facing tough schedules. They were children trapped in a machine that consumed their childhoods, stole their earnings, and left them broken. The studio system treated child stars as property, controlling every aspect of their lives through manipulation, medication, and outright abuse. From forced addictions to stolen fortunes, these 18 tragic stories reveal how Hollywood's most vulnerable performers paid the ultimate price for fame. 1. Bobby Driscoll. Disney's first contracted child star, and the voice of Peter Pan crashed from Academy Award winner to dying alone in an abandoned tenement at 31. Driscoll began his Disney career at 7, winning a special Oscar at 12 for his roles in Song of the South and So Dear to My Heart. But Disney controlled every aspect of his life through an ironclad contract that gave them ownership of his image, name, and future. When puberty hit and Driscoll developed severe acne, Walt Disney personally terminated his contract, calling him too ugly for films. The studio then blacklisted him throughout Hollywood, with Disney ensuring no other studio would hire him. By 17, Driscoll's career was completely destroyed by the very studio that had made him famous. The systematic destruction of Driscoll's life went beyond career sabotage. Disney had introduced him to amphetamines at 10 to keep him energetic during long shoots, creating a dependency the studio encouraged. When they dropped him, he lost access to studio doctors who'd been managing his medications, leading to desperate attempts to self-medicate. His parents, who'd spent all his earnings despite the Coogan law supposedly protecting child actors' income, abandoned him when the money disappeared. Driscoll tried to restart his career in New York, but was repeatedly rejected by directors who'd been warned by Disney representatives to avoid him. He died alone in 1968, his body remaining unidentified for over a year, while his mother didn't even report him missing. 2. Jackie Coogan. The original child star who inspired child actor protection laws ironically had his entire fortune stolen before those laws existed. Coogan earned millions as Charlie Chaplin's co-star in The Kid and subsequent films, becoming the highest-paid child actor of the 1920s. His parents controlled every penny, spending lavishly on themselves while telling Jackie his money was being saved. When Coogan turned 21 and asked for his earnings, estimated at $4 million, $60 million today, his mother coldly informed him that every cent was gone. She and his stepfather had spent it all on fur coats, diamonds, and luxury cars. When Coogan sued, his mother famously declared, "No promises were ever made to give Jackie anything. Every dollar he earned belonged to his parents." The legal battle revealed the horrifying extent of parental exploitation in Hollywood. Coogan's father had died in a car accident when Jackie was still young, and his mother immediately married their financial advisor, who helped accelerate the spending. They forced Coogan to continue working through exhaustion and illness, threatening to abandon him if he refused. The court case exposed that Coogan's parents had even taken out life insurance policies on him, essentially betting on his death. Though Coogan eventually won a settlement, he received only $126,000 from his millions in earnings. The case led to the California Child Actors Bill, known as the Coogan Law, but by then Jackie's childhood, fortune, and faith in family had been completely destroyed. 3. Judy Garland. MGM's systematic destruction of Frances Gumm, who became Judy Garland, remains Hollywood's most documented case of studio-sanctioned child abuse. Signed at 13, MGM immediately put Garland on a daily diet of pills, amphetamines, to suppress her appetite and keep her thin, barbiturates to help her sleep after the stimulants, and more pills to wake her up for early morning shoots. Studio executives called her fat little pig and hunchback to her face, forcing her onto a diet of chicken soup, black coffee, and cigarettes to curb her appetite. By 15, while filming The Wizard of Oz, Garland was working 18-hour days, surviving on pills provided every 4 hours by studio doctors who kept detailed logs of her chemical dependency that MGM later destroyed. The studio's control extended to every aspect of Garland's existence. They monitored her dates, tapped her phone calls, and had spies report on her every movement. When Garland fell in love with Tyrone Power during a film, MGM executives threatened to destroy both their careers if they continued seeing each other. At 17, when she became pregnant by her first husband David Rose, MGM and her mother forced her to have an abortion, with studio doctors performing the procedure. They told her a baby would ruin her career and made her sign documents agreeing to the procedure while she was heavily medicated. Garland attempted to escape the studio multiple times, but MGM would send security to retrieve her, increase her medication, and threaten to sue her family for breach of contract. By 25, she'd been institutionalized multiple times, each breakdown carefully hidden from the public by MGM's publicity machine. 4. Mickey Rooney. MGM's biggest child star endured systematic exploitation that left him financially and emotionally destroyed despite earning millions for the studio. Rooney began at MGM at 7 years old, quickly becoming their most profitable star, yet saw almost none of his earnings. The studio controlled his finances through his parents, who spent everything while keeping Mickey working 7 days a week. MGM executives gave him pills to control his height, fearing he'd grow too tall for his Andy Hardy role, permanently stunning his growth. They forced him through 8 marriages, several arranged by the studio for publicity, and controlled his romantic life with threats and manipulation. When Rooney tried to join the military during World War II, MGM initially blocked him, fearing the loss of profits, only allowing it when public pressure became overwhelming. The depth of MGM's control over Rooney was staggering. They monitored his weight daily, forcing him onto crash diets and pills when he gained even a pound. Studio fixers covered up numerous scandals, including car accidents and violent incidents, to protect their investment. When Rooney discovered at 21 that his entire fortune had been spent, MGM offered him a loan against future earnings, trapping him in debt to the studio. He was forced to make films he hated, with executives threatening to end his career if he refused. By his 30s, Rooney owed MGM more than he earned, despite having generated hundreds of millions for the studio as a child. 5. Shirley Temple. Hollywood's biggest child star endured exploitation that would horrify modern audiences, with her image generating millions while she received a fraction of the profits. Temple began performing at 3 years old, with 20th Century Fox signing her to a contract that gave them complete control over her life. The studio insured her famous curls for $25,000, but paid her just $150 per week, while she generated millions in revenue. Her mother Gertrude managed every aspect of her existence, from counting the precise number of curls, exactly 56, to monitoring her food intake to prevent weight gain. Temple was forced to work 6 days a week, often 12 hours daily, with tutoring squeezed between takes. When she misbehaved, the studio punished her by locking her in a windowless sound booth they called the punishment box, until she agreed to comply. The exploitation went beyond financial abuse. Temple later revealed that studio executives, including Arthur Freed, exposed themselves to her when she was 12, and she narrowly escaped assault multiple times. When she reported these incidents to studio management, they blamed her for misunderstanding and threatened her mother with contract termination. At 12, MGM's Louis B. Mayer called Temple into his office alone and assaulted her, only stopping when she screamed. The studio system protected these predators while silencing their victims. Temple's own father had abandoned the family after spending her earnings. and her mother used Shirley's income to support extended family members. When Temple turned 21 and gained control of her finances, she discovered only $44,000 remained from her millions in childhood earnings. The psychological toll was immense. Temple struggled with trust issues and identity crisis after her child star years ended abruptly at 12, when 20th Century Fox dropped her contract. 6. Margaret O'Brien. The child actress who sobbed on cue for MGM was actually crying from real trauma inflicted by the studio system. O'Brien's mother would tell her devastating lies before scenes that her dog had died, her father was injured, or other tragedies, to produce genuine tears for the camera. MGM executives praised this technique, encouraging increasingly cruel manipulations to get emotional performances from the 4-year-old. The studio controlled O'Brien's diet so strictly that she developed eating disorders that lasted into adulthood. They forced her to work while seriously ill, once making her perform with a 103-degree fever because production couldn't be delayed. When O'Brien won a Special Academy Award at 7, MGM immediately increased her working hours, reasoning that an Oscar winner should produce more content. The financial exploitation of O'Brien was systematic and ruthless. Her mother signed contracts giving MGM unprecedented control, including rights to loan O'Brien to other studios and pocket the difference between her salary and the loan-out fee. The studio made millions from these arrangements while O'Brien received her standard weekly salary. When she turned 18, O'Brien discovered her mother had spent everything, including investments that should have been protected under the Coogan Law. Her mother had been taking salary as her manager, costumer, and coach, multiple paychecks from the same performances. MGM had known about this double-dipping, but allowed it because it kept O'Brien's mother cooperative with studio demands. 7. Baby Peggy. Diana Sarah Carey, known as Baby Peggy, was Hollywood's first million-dollar baby who ended up destitute by age 10. Starting at 19 months old, Peggy was worked like an adult performer, making 2 reel comedies every week for Century Studios. Her father, a tyrannical stage parent, controlled every moment of her life with military precision. He forced her to perform dangerous stunts without safety equipment. She was burned by hot lamps, nearly drowned in a scene, and once fell 2 stories when a stunt went wrong. When Peggy cried from exhaustion or injury, her father would threaten to abandon her at an orphanage. By age 4, she was supporting her entire extended family, with relatives moving to Hollywood to live off her earnings. The studio worked her 7 days a week, often 16 hours daily, with no concern for her physical or mental well-being. The financial exploitation was absolute. Peggy earned millions but never saw a cent. Her father negotiated a salary of $1.5 million per year in 1923, equivalent to $22 million today, but spent everything on luxury cars, failed business ventures, and supporting dozens of relatives. When Peggy's career ended abruptly at 10, after a contract dispute, the family was penniless. Her father blamed her for their poverty, telling her she'd failed them by not remaining cute enough. The psychological damage was devastating. Peggy attempted to restart her career as a teenager, but found herself blacklisted because her father had burned bridges with every studio. She spent decades in poverty, working as an extra and bookstore clerk while coming to terms with her stolen childhood. It wasn't until her 80s that she finally received recognition for her contribution to cinema. But by then the damage was irreversible. 8. Carl Alfalfa Switzer. The freckled-faced star of Our Gang comedies met a violent end that traced directly back to his exploited childhood. Switzer joined the series at 7, becoming one of its most popular characters. But Hal Roach Studios paid him just $40 per week while profiting enormously from his image. The studio forced him to maintain his alfalfa appearance even off-screen, threatening lawsuit if he cut his hair or gained weight. They controlled his public appearances, forcing him to perform at promotional events without additional pay. When his voice changed at 12, Roach immediately terminated his contract with no severance or support, leaving Switzer unemployable because he'd been typecast. The studio had never provided education beyond basic requirements, leaving him functionally illiterate and unable to pursue other careers. The aftermath of Switzer's childhood stardom was tragic. Unable to find acting work and with no education or savings, he turned to increasingly desperate measures to survive. He worked as a bartender, hunting guide, and eventually became involved in questionable business dealings. His personality changed from the trauma of exploitation. Friends described him as bitter, paranoid, and prone to violent outbursts. In 1959, at just 31, Switzer was shot and killed in a dispute over $50, dying broke and forgotten by Hollywood. The man who killed him claimed self-defense and was never prosecuted, with authorities showing little interest in investigating the death of a former child star. 9. Dickie Moore. The child actor who appeared in over 100 films before age 18 was systematically exploited by both his parents and the studios, leaving him emotionally shattered. Moore started performing at 11 months old, with his mother forging his work permits and lying about his age to circumvent child labor laws. By age 7, he was the primary breadwinner for his entire extended family, working at multiple studios simultaneously. His parents would sign him to overlapping contracts, forcing him to work 20-hour days jumping between productions. When Moore collapsed from exhaustion on set at age 9, his mother gave him Benzedrine to keep him working, beginning an addiction the studios encouraged. The studios treated him as property to be loaned out. Hal Roach would rent him to MGM for $500 per day, while paying Moore just $10. The psychological manipulation Moore endured was calculated and cruel. Directors would tell him his parents would abandon him if he didn't cry on cue, or that his sick grandmother would die if he ruined a take. His mother reinforced these threats, telling him the family would starve without his income. When puberty hit and roles dried up, his parents blamed him for betraying them by growing up. They'd saved nothing from his earnings, having spent everything on failed business ventures and supporting relatives who'd never worked. Moore discovered at 18 that he was actually in debt, as his parents had taken loans against his future earnings. The betrayal destroyed his ability to trust anyone, and he spent decades in therapy dealing with the trauma. He later became one of the first former child stars to speak openly about the exploitation. But by then, the damage to his entire generation was complete. 10. Jackie Cooper. The youngest person ever nominated for Best Actor at age 9 endured abuse that would constitute criminal child endangerment today. During filming of Skippy in 1931, director Norman Taurog, Cooper's own uncle, psychologically tortured him to get emotional performances. When Cooper couldn't cry on cue, Taurog told him his dog would be shot, then had someone take the dog away and fire a gun while Cooper watched. The trauma was so severe that Cooper suffered nightmares for decades. Paramount Studios knew about these methods, but encouraged them because they produced profitable performances. Cooper was forced to work with pneumonia, whooping cough, and a broken arm that was hidden under costumes. His mother, who managed his career, would punish him by withholding food if he didn't perform well, keeping him underweight for his boyish appearance. The financial abuse paralleled the physical exploitation. Cooper earned $3,000 per week at his peak, but his mother and stepfather spent everything on themselves, while keeping Jackie in worn clothes to maintain his poor kid image. They forced him to sign contracts he couldn't read, including one that gave away rights to his image in perpetuity. When Cooper turned 21, he discovered his mother had hidden money in her own accounts, while claiming poverty to make him keep working. She'd also been taking bribes from studios to force Jackie into inappropriate scenes, including dangerous stunts that child actors were supposedly protected from. Cooper's attempts to gain control of his career were sabotaged by his mother, who spread rumors about his difficulty to prevent him getting adult roles. 11. Natalie Wood. The Russian-American child star endured horrifying treatment that her mother not only allowed, but orchestrated for career advancement. Maria Zakharenko, who changed the family name to Wood, controlled every aspect of Natalie's life with terrifying intensity. She would tear butterfly wings in front of Natalie before emotional scenes to make her cry, and once threw a live butterfly into a fire to traumatize her daughter for a particularly intense scene. When Wood was filming The Green Promise at 10 years old, a bridge collapsed during a scene, breaking her left wrist. Her mother refused medical treatment until filming wrapped, leaving Wood with a permanently deformed wrist she hid for the rest of her life. Maria told directors about Natalie's deepest fears, especially her terror of dark water, so they could exploit them for authentic performances. The exploitation extended beyond emotional manipulation to physical danger and inappropriate situations. At 15, Wood experienced misconduct from a powerful actor more than twice her age, an incident her mother knew about but covered up to protect Natalie's career. Maria had essentially arranged private meetings with industry figures, accepting expensive gifts and payments while leaving Natalie in vulnerable situations. The studios were complicit, facilitating these meetings and silencing any complaints. Wood's earnings supported her entire family, with her father struggling with alcohol and her mother spending lavishly while keeping Natalie on a strict allowance. Maria would sign contracts without reading them, agreeing to any terms that brought immediate payment. By the time Wood gained control of her finances at 21, most of her childhood earnings had vanished into her mother's extravagant lifestyle and failed business ventures. 12. Patty Duke. The youngest person to win an Academy Award at 16 lived through systematic mistreatment that later triggered severe mental health struggles. Duke's managers, John and Ethel Ross, gained custody of her at 8 years old and proceeded to control every aspect of her existence. They changed her name, invented a false biography, and forbade any contact with her real family. The Rosses gave Duke alcohol and prescription medications from age 8, using substances to control her moods and behavior. They would wake her in the middle of the night for performance practice, depriving her of sleep to keep her compliant. When Duke questioned their control, they would lock her in closets or withhold food for days. They took all her earnings, giving her just enough money for basic necessities while they lived luxuriously. The psychological manipulation was constant. They would tell her that her mother had abandoned her, that she was worthless without them, and that terrible things would happen if she tried to leave. The inappropriate situations Duke endured were systematic and protected by the industry. The Rosses would arrange private meetings with producers and directors, collecting payments for this access. When Duke tried to report misconduct, the Rosses would punish her for making up stories and increase her medication. Studios knew about the situation but continued working with the Rosses because Duke was profitable. At 17, when Duke tried to escape, the Rosses had her briefly institutionalized, claiming she was having an emotional breakdown. It wasn't until she turned 18 and married that she finally broke free. But by then, the damage was severe. She spent decades dealing with mental health challenges likely triggered by the childhood trauma and substance dependency forced upon her. 13. Freddie Bartholomew. The British child star who became MGM's highest-paid actor in the 1930s was trapped in a vicious custody battle that destroyed his fortune and family. Bartholomew's Aunt Millicent took him from his parents at age 3, claiming she could manage his career better. When he became successful in Hollywood, earning $4,000 per week, his birth parents suddenly reappeared, launching legal battles that lasted years. The court cases revealed shocking exploitation. Millicent had been taking 70% of Freddie's earnings as her management fee, while his parents fought for control of the remaining money. MGM fueled the conflict, knowing that keeping Freddie's guardians fighting meant they could control him completely. The studio provided lawyers for whichever side would keep Freddie working, prolonging the custody battle for their benefit. The psychological toll on Bartholomew was devastating. He was forced to testify against his own parents in court at age 12, with MGM coaches preparing his testimony. The studio isolated him from other children, fearing they might influence him to rebel. They monitored his letters, tapped his phone calls, and had security follow him constantly. When Bartholomew reached 18 and tried to access his earnings, he discovered that between legal fees, his aunt's taking, and his parents' settlements, only $5,000 remained from millions earned. The betrayal by every adult in his life left him emotionally broken. MGM immediately dropped his contract when he aged out of child roles, leaving him with no education, no money, and no family support. He enlisted in the Air Force to escape Hollywood and never returned to major filming, living quietly and avoiding any discussion of his stolen childhood. 14. Edith Fellows. Known as the solitary child in films, Fellows lived that reality off-screen through Calculated Isolation by Columbia Pictures. Starting at age 4, Fellows was contracted to play orphans and unwanted children, with studio executives deciding she should live her roles for authenticity. They kept her separated from other child actors, claiming it would make her performances more genuine. Her grandmother, who managed her career, collaborated with the studio's cruel methods, forcing Edith to sleep in a closet to understand poverty and feeding her only one meal a day to maintain her thin, waif-like appearance. Columbia executives would tell her before scenes that nobody wanted her, that she was lucky the studio gave her work, creating real emotional distress they captured on film. The financial exploitation was methodical and complete. Fellows earned substantial sums playing poverty-stricken children, but her grandmother spent everything on gambling and failed investments. The studio knew about the grandmother's gambling problem, but continued paying her directly, using it as leverage to ensure Fellows' compliance. When Fellows tried to report her treatment to authorities at age 14, Columbia threatened to blacklist her entire family from Hollywood. They forced her to work with bronchitis, measles, and a broken foot, hiding her injuries under costumes. At 16, when Fellows finally escaped her grandmother's control through an early marriage, she discovered she had nothing, no savings, no education, and no skills beyond playing tragic children. Columbia had made millions from her image of childhood suffering while ensuring she lived that suffering in reality. 15. Diana Durbin. Universal's golden-voiced teenage star who saved the studio from bankruptcy was imprisoned in a gilded cage that destroyed her spirit. Durbin started at MGM alongside Judy Garland, but when they dropped her contract, Universal signed her and built their entire studio around her image. By 14, she was earning $3,000 per week and receiving 400,000 fan letters annually. But Universal controlled every aspect of her existence. They created a completely fabricated persona, the perfect American teenager, and forced Durbin to live it 24 hours a day. She couldn't choose her clothes, her friends, or even her hairstyle without studio approval. Universal executives monitored her weight daily, putting her on dangerous diet pills when she gained even 2 pounds. They arranged her romantic relationships for publicity, forcing her to date men chosen by the studio while forbidding her from seeing anyone she actually liked. The studio's control extended to her family and finances in devastating ways. Universal paid Durbin's parents to enforce studio rules at home, essentially making them paid wardens. When she turned 21 and tried to access her earnings, she discovered the studio had structured her contracts so that most of her money went to production costs, and publicity expenses that were never itemized. She'd earned millions, but had access to only a small trust fund. When Durbin tried to choose her own roles or work with different directors, Universal threatened to sue her for breach of contract and destroy her reputation. The final blow came when she married against studio wishes. Universal launched a vicious campaign against her, spreading rumors about her being difficult and ungrateful. At 27, exhausted and broken, Durbin fled to France and never returned to Hollywood, later saying she'd been a prisoner who happened to sing 16 Sabu Dastagir. The Indian actor, discovered at 12, became Universal's exotic star while enduring racist exploitation that destroyed his identity and future. Found working in the stables of an Indian Maharaja, Sabu was brought to Hollywood and immediately remade into a stereotype. Universal forced him to speak in broken English on screen despite his fluency, wear exotic costumes in public, and play only savage or primitive characters. The studio paid him a fraction of what white child actors earned while profiting enormously from his films. They housed him in substandard accommodations, claiming it would help him stay authentic, while his co-stars stayed in luxury hotels. Universal executives would refer to him using racial slurs even in his presence, treating him as a curiosity rather than a person. His handlers were instructed to keep him away from other Indian immigrants, fearing he might become too westernized and lose his marketability. The financial and personal exploitation was complete and cruel. Sabu's contracts were handled by studio-appointed guardians who spent his earnings on themselves while giving him an allowance barely sufficient for food. When World War II began, Universal lobbied to keep him from serving, not out of concern for his safety, but to protect their investment. When he finally enlisted against their wishes, the studio blacklisted him throughout Hollywood. After the war, he returned to find no studio would hire him. Universal had spread word that he was unreliable. His attempts to transition to adult roles were sabotaged by the very studio that had created his image. Sabu died at 39 of a heart attack, having spent his final years working as a furniture salesman, completely abandoned by the industry that had exploited his youth and culture for profit. 17. Elizabeth Taylor. While she became Hollywood's greatest star, Taylor's childhood was stolen by a mother who treated her as a commodity and studios that exploited her from age 9. Sarah Taylor, a former actress herself, forced Elizabeth into performing, lying about her age to get around child labor laws. At 10, Taylor was working 14-hour days at MGM, with her mother giving her pills to stay awake and different pills to sleep. Sarah would sign any contract that brought immediate payment, including ones that gave MGM control over Elizabeth's life until age 18. The studio dictated her diet, keeping her on dangerous weight loss regimens that caused lifelong health problems. They forced her through the traumatic experience of filming with dangerous animals. During National Velvet, Taylor suffered a severe back injury from a horse fall that MGM covered up, forcing her to continue filming while in excruciating pain. The personal violations Taylor endured as a child were systematically covered up by MGM's publicity machine. Studio executives would arrange dates with older actors for publicity while she was still a minor, putting her in inappropriate situations that her mother allowed for career advancement. Sarah Taylor would leave Elizabeth alone with powerful men in the industry, accepting gifts and payments while ignoring her daughter's distress. When Taylor tried to refuse certain roles or situations at 15, MGM threatened to destroy her entire family's livelihood. They'd moved from England and were entirely dependent on Elizabeth's income. The studio monitored her friendships, forbidding her from associating with anyone they deemed inappropriate influences. By the time Taylor gained independence at 18, she'd never had a normal childhood experience. couldn't function without pills her mother had started giving her, and had already been married once in a studio-arranged union. The patterns of exploitation established in her childhood would haunt her entire life. 18. Mitzi Green. The child actress who could impersonate anyone became a victim of her own talent, worked to exhaustion by Paramount until she literally collapsed. Green started performing at 3, blessed with an extraordinary ability to mimic voices and mannerisms. By age 8, she was Paramount's utility player, inserted into any film that needed a child who could sing, dance, and do impressions. The studio worked her 7 days a week, often having her appear in multiple films simultaneously. Directors would demand take after take of her impression routines, not caring that she was destroying her voice. By age 10, Green had developed vocal nodes from overuse, but Paramount's doctors gave her throat sprays and injections to numb the pain so she could keep performing. Her parents, who lived entirely off her earnings, sided with the studio, forcing her to work through bronchitis, tonsillitis, and severe exhaustion. The breaking point came when Green collapsed on set at 14, her body simply unable to continue. Paramount's response was to drop her contract immediately, claiming she was unreliable. They blacklisted her throughout Hollywood, ensuring no other studio would risk hiring her. Green discovered that her parents had saved nothing from her years of earnings, having spent everything on luxury items and failed business ventures. The studio had structured her contract so that much of her money went to training and development costs that were never explained. With her voice permanently damaged and her reputation destroyed by Paramount's blacklisting, Green struggled to find work in any capacity. She spent years trying to rebuild her career in theater and nightclubs, but never recovered financially or emotionally from her childhood exploitation. She died at 48, having spent 3 decades dealing with the physical and psychological damage inflicted during her child star years. These 18 child stars remind us that Golden Age Hollywood's glamour was built on the systematic destruction of innocent lives. The studios didn't just steal childhoods, they stole futures, fortunes, and in many cases, the very will to live. From Bobby Driscoll dying alone in an abandoned building to Judy Garland's lifelong struggle with dependency forced upon her by MGM, these stories reveal an industry that consumed its youngest and most vulnerable performers. The price of entertaining millions was paid by children who never had a choice. Which destroyed childhood haunted you the most? Let us know in the comments below.